Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and finance. This week, the price of military intervention. Russia goes after Crimea, but at what cost? The markets didn't like it, nor did the West. We look at the flip side of the crisis in Ukraine being played out in Moscow. Also this week, South Africa's slowdown. Elections are just a couple of months away. We talk to the head of the country's biggest bank and find out if the economy can actually create the jobs it so badly needs. And the Swiss ban on migrants and how the beautiful game might cope without access to overseas players. So last week it was all about Ukraine, the perilous state of its economy and how a regional tug of war had blown everything wide open. This week we're on the other side of the coin, Russia, and how the Ukraine crisis is actually exposing cracks in what we generally perceive as a big, strong petro-economy. At the centre of it, as ever, is one man, the Russian President Vladimir Putin. But did he underestimate the international response, both political and financial, to his effective military control of Ukraine's Crimea region? The sudden threat of war certainly shocked Russian markets. $60 billion was wiped off the value of Russian companies as worried international investors tried to figure out how the political climate was changing. Russia was also forced to spend $12 billion supporting its currency, the ruble, which hit a record low. It also did that by raising interest rates by 1.5%, which for a stagnating economy just makes things worse. Russia was already heading for a mild recession this year. So it was a shaky time locally. And then the international community chimed in, collectively unimpressed at Russia's unilateral action. But while the response was united and determined, it lacks bite. And it is pretty simple to see why. Have a look. Russia supplies a third of Europe's gas supplies. That is major. You take aim at that, it'll hurt both sides. The United States did call for a halt to trade talks, which sounds big. But that trade with Russia is only $38 billion, not much when the combined size of both economies is more than $18 trillion. So what's left? Sanctions, of course, the diplomatic go-to in times of trouble. I mean, there could be things like banking restrictions, but then think of the many rich Russians who've made, for example, London their home. Visas could be stopped, assets could be frozen. None of this, though, matches anything handed out to the likes of Iran, Iraq or North Korea over the years. Here's Peter Sharp now looking at what international sanctions could or couldn't do to the Russian economy.
It's been described as Moscow's cathedral of consumerism, the biggest shopping complex in the capital. This is the European Mall. 8 huge floors filled with all the top brands from London, Paris and Milan. The face of a new Moscow facing a new threat from Europe. The threat of sanctions and retaliation for Moscow's intrigues in Ukraine. Shoppers now anxious about what's ahead.
It will influence us. The minimum damage is that the European goods will be more expensive. We work with foreign companies or with foreign goods. There are a lot of them on our market.
We're going to be fine without Europe or the USA. We have a strong economy. We will cooperate more with CIS countries and Asia. We will turn east.
But at Moscow's brand new financial centre at the heart of the city, the mood on the currency and trading desks is a little more relaxed, a feeling the sanctions are a two-way street. Because they know that sanctions can cut both ways. Russia is quite simply Europe's biggest single trading partner, accounting for more than 40% of trade last year. No surprises that the EU has failed to share Washington's enthusiasm for strong economic measures against Russia. Some of Europe's biggest economies are most vulnerable. Germany, 40% of its gas and oil imports come from Russia, while the other way around, Germany accounts for 30% of all EU exports to Russia. France, in 2011, negotiated the biggest sale of weaponry to Russia worth $1.6 billion. Including putting up for sale a pair of Mistral helicopter carriers, the first due for delivery this year. And London is now the safe haven for Russian billionaires, who spent $900 million on the London property market in the last year alone, with 70 Russian companies listed on the London Stock Exchange.
President Putin said we might lose something on these sanctions, but I don't really expect profound sanctions, and I don't really expect that there will be a substantial damage to Russia's economy.
And in Moscow, the Kremlin's now drawing up a raft of retaliatory measures if sanctions are imposed on Russia. On Thursday, the EU froze the assets of the former Ukrainian leader Viktor Yanukovych and 16 other senior officials. That sanctions net could well be widened now, following news of the Crimea's decision to join the Russian Federation.
So what's the economic story in Russia? Are Ukraine and Crimea giving it the wobbles? Let's ask Ivan Mazalov in London. He's a director at Prosperity Capital Management, which is one of the biggest investors in Russia. Can you just explain to us, Ivan, the shock the Russian markets got after the trouble in Crimea began? We saw money wiped off Russian stocks. We saw the ruble fall. The central bank intervened. Talk us through what happened and how significant it was.
Yeah, starting with the impact so far, the market sold off quite strongly on Monday on the news over the weekend, and it was down 12%. The ruble was down, but not so much, as you have mentioned. The Russian government intervened, well, the central bank rather. It raised the interest rates to 7% and also reportedly spent some money, spent some foreign exchange in order to protect the ruble. The vulnerability of the Russian market could have been much higher if it was one of the popular destinations for international financial investors recently, which it wasn't, in line with many other emerging markets, and probably even more so ignored. So from this angle, the impact was not as big as it could have been, although the sheer magnitude of decline was quite high. Obviously, the lower level of certainty about what could happen next. We know the facts of, about Crimea. Russian troops are deployed in Crimea, but obviously the implications could be more wide-ranging, or at least it looked so on Monday.
Okay, Ivan, let me go back to the point that you made about Crimea itself, the fact that the economic impact wasn't so big because it's not a named destination for anything really. Why then is it so important for Russia to go after it? There's no natural resources, oil or gas. Why go after Crimea in the end?
Well, if we separate the market impact and the motives of President Putin, if you're interested in the motives of President Putin, how I see it, I think it's the fear of NATO's relentless push towards Moscow, and this is what has come up on numerous occasions, and this is very similar to what happened in Georgia 4 years ago. I mean, there are different motives, of course, but I think this is a very strong motive that is very important for Putin.
What about Western reaction? If we look at the attempts at diplomacy and deterrence by the West against Russia, there is talk of sanctions and the like, but really anything that any Western country has talked about appears to be, I would think, a lot more mild in comparison to sanctions against other countries. Does the West just not want to go after Russia fully?
I think the world is quite interconnected economically, and Russia has used quite strong language in suggesting that there will be reciprocal retaliation to all economic sanctions on a country-by-country basis. It is not in the interests of international business community to rock the boat. The world is not going through a very prosperous stretch, so any strong shocks to the economy could be quite dangerous.
Ivan, how do you and how do your clients feel about investing their money in Russia now? Does it start to put them off, this sort of political uncertainty?
Actually, in line with what I said, we didn't see the exodus of money. there was some market reaction, as you saw, but the investors who have committed their money to Russia over the last years are prepared to wait out. It's less volatile part of the international capital. Russia has quite strong fundamentals, and all depends on how the country develops in economic and political sense.
But fundamentals, Ivan, sorry to interrupt you, fundamentals which you talk about, Russia having strong ones, outside of the petrodollars, the oil and gas is their real strength. The Russian economy is stagnating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, economy is slowing down. The growth has slowed down. But if you look at companies which you can invest in, it's not just oil and gas companies. There is a diverse domestic economy with focus on consumption, on investment, and you can pick local industry champions that have quite good management. The country still goes quite obviously through internal reforms. The market shares change quite rapidly. This is an emerging market in the sense that you don't have stable competitive environment, and you can invest into companies that grow very fast. You can invest into, like I said, consumption related companies. You can invest into technology companies. So it's not so black and white. You wouldn't say that this is just oil or this is just natural resources.
It's Ivan Marzalov giving us the background to Russia's current financial situation with Ukraine and Crimea. Thanks, Ivan. And still ahead on Counting the Costs, Swiss immigration quotas. We've talked about them before. Coming up, though, how they could affect the beautiful game in Switzerland. Now, just as the Ukraine story got us thinking about Russia's economy, a look at Zimbabwe a few weeks ago did the same with regards to its neighbour, South Africa. We touched on South Africa then, the economic struggle during the apartheid years, and its recent stagnation too, which is crucial given there's an election coming up in May. Look at these problems they've got there. Unemployment stubbornly high at 25%. 5 million jobs. President Jacob Zuma's promised that, but his popularity is not exactly strong. And 2%, the rate of growth last year, which will eventually see Africa's biggest economy overtaken by Nigeria. Let's talk to someone who knows a thing or two about South Africa's financial situation. The co-CEO of the country's biggest bank, Standard Bank, Sim Chabalala, is joining us from Johannesburg. There is lots I want to talk to you about with regards to the whole country, but I've also seen your financial results come out, which are, when adjusted, quite flat. And I wonder if that perhaps reflects the whole economic state of South Africa at the moment. Even the banking sector as well. Things are just a bit flat there.
Kamal, I would take issue with the use of the word flat. I would have said they're strong. They're up 15% at 17.2 billion rand at an ROE of 14.1%. And that reflects good growth in South Africa, but even more important than that, fantastic growth out of our operations on the rest of the continent, north of South Africa.
So where are you, or well, tell me about those other locations. I guess I'm trying to get a fix on where the strong places are for you, given that you operate in, I think it's at least 18 countries in Africa you're operating in.
Quite right. It's now 20 countries. We've added Cote d'Ivoire and Ethiopia to our network. The biggest drivers would obviously be South Africa, because that's the home base. A big player in the team would be the Nigerian operations, and then of course the East Africa region, and indeed the South and Central region of the operations. They're mainly in Anglophone Africa. The operations outside South Africa on the continent contributed 20% to headline earnings, but contributed closer to nearly 30%, nearly a third of our revenues.
So is the story that, and this kind of goes back to my first question, that South Africa perhaps isn't the growth engine that you're looking for right now? I know it's your base, but things here, you know, the economy only growing about 2%, probably to be overtaken by Nigeria at some point as the biggest economy in Africa.
I would characterize it slightly differently to the way you're proposing it. I would say the South African operations remain the backbone of our group. They continue to produce the largest revenues and the largest generator of capital, which capital we are using to grow elsewhere. There is still room for banking penetration, so we're still able to sell all our financial services products at a higher rate because of under penetration. And as you correctly point out, the bank grows on the basis of banking penetration and GDP. Yes, GDP at 2% is slower than the rest of the continent. The vectors of growth in our numbers, as you correctly point out, are indeed the operations outside South Africa, where GDP growth is 6%.
So let me get your thoughts then, Sim, as a businessman who operates in South Africa. I'm trying to get an idea of the business climate there, because the numbers, as we've already pointed out, don't look particularly good. But I want to know what business confidence is like. Do the people feel, yes, the jobs are coming, all these jobs which Jacob Zuma promised, they are going to come, and it's going to help lift us out of our current situation?
I think I would make reference to the speech made by the Minister of Finance, the budget speech earlier this month, and I would point out a number of things that are encouraging from that speech. The first one is we're getting much clearer policy coherence. We're much clearer about the implementation of the National Development Plan. It is being executed. It is forming the backbone of budgeting and planning in the country. And that gives business more confidence, because we know in which direction, from a policy point of view, the country is going. We're now working and being invited by government to join forces, to work more closely in the implementation and the installation of infrastructure in South Africa. That is good for confidence. The growth of the African continent, as you and I made reference to earlier, is an exciting prospect for South Africa, in that increasingly the continent is taking up a larger proportion of South Africa's trade. Whereas in the past it was mainly Europe, the US, and the Far East. The continent is taking a bigger proportion of that, and it is also taking a bigger proportion of investment, which is fantastic for our construction firms, our mining houses, and our retail companies, and indeed then for the financial services and all other services that support these industries.
So it is trickling down then? You actually feel that these changes are reaching those who really need it? Because when you see that number, that headline number, like 25% unemployment, you know, jobs are all that matter in the end. All that people want to know is that they can get a job, hold a job, and have some stable income.
I would argue that, Kamal, that there is a plan which is credible to address poverty, inequality, and unemployment in South Africa. You're correct. An unemployment rate of 25% is untenable. It's not acceptable. Nor is a Gini coefficient of 0.6, nor is a poverty rate of that we currently have. But it is also true to say that these are being addressed. And it's also true to say that the institutions in South Africa are getting better, they're getting deeper, and the plans necessary to address those three evils that you and I are talking about are credible, and they're being executed.
Sim Chabalala, I'll give you this. You're a very positive man. It's good to hear that voice coming out of South Africa. Thank you for joining us here on Counting the Cost. We turn to China now, and one of its major issues, the problem of growing debt. Now, massive spending by local government has kept the economy on track, but at what cost? Rob McBride explains now from one of China's most indebted cities, Chongqing in the southwest.
Enjoying the wintry sunshine beneath early peach blossom. For people on this sprawling public housing estate, life looks better thanks to massive public spending. Living in modern apartments for about $100 a month, these blocks are the result of the city's unprecedented building boom.
The local government paid a lot of attention to improve the city's infrastructure and create better living conditions.
The city has been making great progress in recent years, growing a lot faster than neighbouring areas.
While residents count themselves lucky, the city has been counting the cost. These grandiose developments are a legacy of Chongqing's former leader, Bo Xilai, imprisoned last year in the highest profile scandal to hit the Chinese leadership in decades. Mostly under his leadership, this mega city of 30 million people doubled the size of its rail system. It tripled its road network. And public housing estates pushed the city's boundaries ever further into surrounding farmland. Chongqing's growth has stood out in a country of extravagant infrastructure projects, whose true costs have raised concerns among international investors. Criticism that China hasn't been as transparent as it could be about the amounts of debt being run up by local governments has led to more accurate audits. Welcomed by analysts, they make for disturbing reading, with many provinces and cities taking on huge debt compared to their incomes, with cities like Chongqing leading the way. In China as a whole, debt surged nearly 70% in 2 years, far more than officials had publicly admitted. But that's balanced by the central government's strong control on the economy.
Economic development varies widely between the provinces, but the central government has a system to support the weaker cities with transfer revenues to balance that out. We believe overall the debt is under control.
Since assuming power, President Xi Jinping has reined in public spending. To avoid a hard landing, the government hopes rising domestic consumption will provide an alternative economic driver.
Now, you might remember a few weeks ago when we looked at the cost of immigration in Europe. Switzerland was our big focus then because it was voting on changing its immigration quotas. Well, we're going back to Switzerland this week with a sporting twist, because Switzerland has a noticeably diverse football team. 2/3 are from immigrant backgrounds. And the changes in law could mean big changes to both the team and even the nation. This from Lee Wellings.
The national football team of Switzerland, proudly ranked as one of the top 8 for the World Cup finals in Brazil. But this is what the team would look like without players whose families are immigrants. The Swiss public has just voted in a referendum to restrict immigration. The margin was less than 1%, but a shock to those who see Switzerland as a multicultural success story.
Wherever you go, to the tram station, where you eat, wherever in your families, it didn't stop yet. People are talking about it quite furiously sometimes. You can't just say it like they're all racist or something like that. That would be too easy. It's not like that.
The national football squad illustrates the confusion over the vote. Over 2/3 are from immigrant backgrounds, mainly from Balkan countries. Star player Xherdan Shaqiri has Kosovo roots. Captain Gökhan Inler was born in Switzerland of Turkish parents, while Johan Djuru was born in Ivory Coast.
Yeah, of course, people will talk about it. That's normal. We human, you know. We of course we're footballers, but we look as well for what's going on around us. And Switzerland has a lot of value. And I think those values are as well from the people aboard. So I think that we should not forget that and try to keep Switzerland as it is now.
Switzerland's latest World Cup warm-up match in the eastern town of St. Gallen shows the complex nature of Swiss national identity. In the Switzerland squad there are players with Croatian backgrounds, while in the Croatian squad, not for the first time, one of the players was born and raised in Switzerland.
We have a lot of Croatian or other people from other countries, and you see it's a nice feeling.
I love it because here can be a lot of other peoples like us from Croatia.
And both of Switzerland's goals in a 2-2 draw were scored by Josip Drmić of Croatian descent. At the World Cup in Brazil, this team will represent years of Switzerland looking outwards and opening its doors. The politics of the next few years and the implementation of the law limiting immigration will determine how the Swiss teams of the future will look and how the Switzerland of the future will look.
And that is our show for this week, but there's more for you online at aljazeera.com. You can click through to the programmes link, and from there you'll find the Counting the Cost page with all our previous episodes for you to catch up on. You can get in touch as well. You can either tweet me at Kamal AJE, there's our business editor as well, at Abid Oliver Ali, and don't forget to use the hashtag Counting the Cost as well. You can also just drop us an old-fashioned email. Countingthecost at aljazeera.net is the address. But that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria. From the whole team, thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.